Chapter 7. Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday dear Ronnie, happy birthday to you. Make a wish Daddy, Macaulay said as he stood beside his father. Looking towards his son, and then towards his daughter, Ronnie could hardly believe that they would begin kindergarten that fall. Within the recent years so much seemed to have gone wrong that Ronnie easily came up with ideas for a birthday wish. All that I could possibly wish for is peace. And possibly some joy. The 24-year-old said. Then backed it up with picking Macaulay up off of the floor and sitting him on his lap as Dondi instantly ran to her father's side as well. Please pick me up too Daddy. Please. Dondi pleaded as she raised her hands up into the air. On the opposite end of the table, Lucifer was separating bowls and plates for cake and ice cream. Well. Malachi began to comment, peace and joy is something that we could all certainly use around here. He finished speaking as he began to fill the bowls, that Lucifer had just gotten out, with bubble-gum-flavored ice cream. Moments later, just as he was almost done scooping the cold treat, he watched Eddie walk up to Ronnie's side and hug him. Since Jason's death, Eddie had been, more than less, distant from those that he had always been close to. He wasn't ever negative towards anyone, however, the spark, that he seemed to have had in the past, had been very much gone. His sudden action of affection caught the attention of everyone as he leaned over Ronnie. Happy birthday Ronnie, Eddie said. Thank you Eddie. Ronnie replied as he then also held onto the hug from his friend. With his response, Eddie had also smiled for what seemed like the first in over a year. Instantly, everyone seemed to be happier than moments before. Belinda, whom was trying to wrestle their children back off of their father's lap, so that he too could eat his cake and ice cream, had patted Eddie on the back as he stood up from hugging Ronnie. I'm glad to see that smile again, Belinda whispered in his ear. Then, with another pat on the back, won her battle on prying Macaulay up off of his father. The birthday had come to an end just before midnight. The 2 hours between that and when they had awoke, before that, seemed to have flown by, causing that particular November 8th to end in a snap of a finger. Hey guys. Eddie spoke up just as Nicole and Malachi finished the dishes. What would you guys think about doing a seance tonight? Sure. Ronnie answered for everyone, why not? Then, as Ronnie stood from the table, set his daughter down to the floor and then hugged his wife as she was wiping the table clean. In about an hour, after Eddie had mentioned the idea of the seance, they were all downstairs sitting outside a circle of candles, thumbtacks, and string. Today we gather together to speak to our friends, Lloyd, James, and Sterling. Malachi, Nicole, Ronnie, Belinda, Lucifer, Macaulay, and Dondi are all gathered here with me tonight too. Hello guys. Lloyd said all of a sudden, I'm happy to see that glow in your face Eddie. You know that Jason would want you to be happy. I'm really trying. Eddie interrupted, I just miss Jason so much. Also, he was my first and only child and I feel as though I threw away. Eddie. Don't even go there. Lloyd said with a stern tone in his voice. What Jason did he did on his own. You were there for him. You loved him just as much, if not more, than what any other parent could. You gave him a loving home, a loving family, and a very enjoyable atmosphere. You, nor anyone else in this house, could have had any control over that child's emotions. You did what you could. I just miss him so much, Eddie continued as he then looked down to the floor. Of course you do. Lloyd responded with a soft voice, he's your son. Now, do what you know he would want you to do. Be happy and enjoy your life. After finishing his sentence, Lloyd then turned to face Malachi. As their eyes met, Malachi instantly smiled back at his friend. Now that's the way that you're supposed to smile. Lloyd said as he pointed at Malachi and looked back towards Eddie. Out of the corner of Lloyd's eye he saw Eddie suddenly smile at the humor. How are you doing my old friend? We're doing great. Just celebrating Ronnie's birthday today. 24 years old. Lloyd interrupted. Then, as he turned to face Ronnie, he continued, Happy birthday Ronnie. Thank you Lloyd, Ronnie said in a quiet voice, then watched as Lloyd looked back towards Malachi. You know Ronnie. You guys seem to be doing great. Your kids are gonna be starting school this year. With an exception of Macaulay, everyone that is male has a dog to guard them. And you all still have each other. Lloyd had, as usual, a little to say to everyone. Then, as he finished, Lloyd's face and voice were changed to Jamie's. "Well, happy birthday, Ronnie," James said immediately. "Thank you, James. Too bad we can't go swimming though." "Why? So that you can hide my shorts and towel on me again?" James joked. Simultaneously Malachi giggled. "Hey," Ronnie continued, "there was a lot of fun and joy back then like we don't get when we're no longer kids." Then, as Ronnie made eye contact with his brother, Eddie, Angel, their wives, and children, he went on, "But then again, I don't know what I would do if anyone here were to suddenly disappear. I love my life and my family." "That's what life is about, Ronnie," James said as he smiled at his friend. "We have to live the best that we can for today. We can't do anything about the past except to learn from it. And, the better that we make our life for today, the better that our future will be tomorrow. One day at a time. Now guys. Sterling wants to talk to you guys." "Hey everyone." Sterling's voice sounded. Instantly, due to the difference in height, everyone's head turned upwards. "Well, it sounds like that James and Lloyd pretty much touched all areas already. I will be pushing Macaulay and Dundee harder over the next few months on their education. As for Lucifer, on the other hand, along with Tommy, they are beginning to reach that age when they don't see us every time that we are there." "Why not?" Nicole interrupted. "Well, it's been a while, but we have talked about this before. Over time, children's minds, unintentionally, become biased. That is exactly why you guys don't see us outside of a seance." "Is there anything that we can do about it?" Malachi asked. "No. This is completely natural. Not right, but very natural," Sterling explained. And then went on to explain his goals with Macaulay and Dundee. After about another 20 minutes or so, everyone had said their goodbyes and then headed back upstairs to prepare for lunch. About 6 months later, on Malachi's 5th birthday, it was just another day that had seemingly followed into Ronnie's birthday wish 6 months prior. Since Ronnie's birthday, there hadn't been any deaths, within their family or friends. For the most part, life was, once again, shadowed with joy and a feeling of peace. "Hey Dad. Can Tommy spend the night please?" Lucifer asked as he came out of his room. "Is your room clean?" Malachi asked as he put his dishes in the sink from his birthday cake. "Yeah. Well then, it's okay with me, if it's okay with your mom." With Lucifer standing in the kitchen, with both of his parents, he only had to look at her and see her nod her head. "Okay. Thank you," the 8-year-old said as he turned back towards the hallway, towards the bedroom, and then pulled his cell phone out of his pocket. "Ah, is Tommy home?" About 30 minutes later, after Lucifer had asked his parents for permission to have Tommy spend the night, the doorbell was ringing. Moments later, you could hear Lucifer slam open his bedroom door, run down the hallway, down the stairs, and then nearly ripping the door off of its hinges. "Hi Lucifer." Malachi, Ronnie, and Eddie all heard Tom's voice exclaim as they all walked towards the top of the stairs. "Hey guys," Malachi said as he looked down the steps, "you two slow down a bit so that nothing gets broken. Understand me?" "Yes sir," Tommy answered, and then quietly followed Lucifer back to his bedroom. "Hey Lucifer. I brought some PlayStation games and a movie," Tom said as they closed the bedroom door. Then, as Tom pulled off his backpack, he sat down on the edge of the bottom bunk, next to Lucifer, and then picked up Lucifer's hand. "I'm surprised that your parents keep the bunk bed in here now that Jason has moved away." "Well," Lucifer responded, "they decided, since you stay the night pretty often, to keep it here. Even though you still don't use it." "Yeah. When I spend the night, I wanna spend it with you. Not up there," Tom commented as he raised his hand to look at Lucifer's. "Hey Tommy. Today was my dad's birthday. We've got leftover cake and ice cream," Lucifer continued talking to his friend as they then both stood up as they still held one another's hand. "Also, I was wondering if maybe, you know, like we did that one time, when we all stayed up watching movies? Could I drink some more of your blood? Sure. Tom replied. Elle thought that was fun when we did that. Then, as he stopped and looked at Lucifer, he continued. How about we go out into the kitchen and eat, then, when we're done, we'll come in here and do that. Okay? It was about another 45 minutes later when Tommy and Lucifer had re-entered the room. Both of them were anxious to begin what had been a great experience before. Just the thought of the upcoming moments had began to cause Lucifer to drool just as excitement poured through each of them. Where do you wanna do it? Lucifer asked as he immediately sat on the mattress to the bottom bunk. Right here on the bed, like last time, should be good. Tommy answered and then removed his shirt. We've just gotta remember to do it where it will be hidden by my shirt. Yeah, you're right. In the same place? Lucifer asked as he too removed his shirt, then stood up as he closed the blinds to the window. I don't know. Last time, when we did it under my collarbone, we had to rearrange ourselves a lot. Let's try it somewhere else, like right here, Tom said as he just pointed at any general area of his belly. Looking to where his friend was pointing, about halfway between his belly button and the base of his sternum. To be more specific, about an inch under his xiphoid process and about 2 inches above his navel cavity. Tommy was extremely skinny as his lower rib cage was well defined. Then, as Tom laid down, on his back, centered on the mattress, Lucifer quickly shut off the bedroom light and then kneeled down beside his friend. Then, after using his hand, to guide himself in the dark, Lucifer located the area that Tom had originally pointed out. Using his hand, on the top of Tom's blue jeans, he guided his face down to Tom's belly. Putting his nose close to the warm skin, Lucifer could smell the slight scent of soap and then lightly, with the tip of his tongue, licked the surrounding skin tissues, causing Tom to quietly giggle. That tickles Lucifer. Then, without another word, Tom then felt the slight feeling of a poke on his belly as he had also felt Lucifer clench down with his upper jaw. Now, with his friend's face buried into the hollow of his frail belly, Tom rested his hands on the back of Lucifer's head and pulled him deeper into the soft tissues. This feels good, Lucifer, Tom whispered. Go deeper. Instantly Tom could feel Lucifer's response. After about an hour into the harvesting, both of the boys seemed to have the energy to keep going for perhaps days later. During that time, Tom felt Lucifer's hands seem to massage the lower edge of his rib cage. Moments later he could also feel Lucifer's hands reaching upwards, towards his sides, under his armpits. It was maybe about 3 o'clock in the morning when the boys were interrupted by the sound of Lucifer's father's feet coming down the hallway. He's coming to let us know that it's time for dinner, Lucifer said as he pulled his canines out of his friend's abdomen. How do you know for sure? Tommy asked as he immediately sat up, and pulled on his t-shirt. Well, Lucifer said as his mind searched for an excuse. There is a lot more about us that you'll be learning as you get to know us better. With this said, Tom looked at his friend with an odd look on his face. Seconds later, Malachi opened the door as he announced that it was time for dinner. Instantly Tom, once again, looked at Lucifer with an odd look on his face. The remaining of that summer was filled, almost daily, with a lot of fun and joy for the whole family. Moments had passed when someone would bring up the fact that Bill DeClue was still missing, then, seconds later, the subject would be swept back under the carpet. In general, Ronnie's last birthday wish had, very much, come true. Okay guys. It's time to get up, Ronnie said as he opened up Lucifer's bedroom door. Just a couple of months prior, shortly after his nephew's last harvesting of Tommy, Ronnie had moved Macaulay into Lucifer's room, on the top bunk. With this move, they had also moved Don D into, what was supposed to be, Angel's bedroom. You've got an hour and a half until you're supposed to be at school. This was the first year of school for Macaulay and Don D. And, until just a week prior to this moment, both of the children had stuck to their nocturnal lifestyle. But Dad. No buts, Macaulay. I want you and Lucifer both out in the kitchen and ready for breakfast within the next 15 minutes. And that's with you dressed and your teeth brushed. Ronnie finished and then turned and walked out of the room. Soon, Ronnie was downstairs arguing the same to his daughter. Come on now, Don D. Your mom is gonna be taking you, your brother, and Lucifer to the school this morning. But Daddy, she protested. I just went to bed a few hours ago. Dawn D. Ron argued, I sent you to bed at 9 o'clock last night. Also, I woke you up, yesterday, at 8 o'clock in the morning and told you to stay awake. I went back to bed after you went to sleep. Dawn D pleaded as she now sat up on the edge of her mattress. Can I please go back to sleep, Daddy? Nope. Dawn D. You and your brother are gonna be getting up and going to school every day. And, for any reason, that you decide that you can't go to school, you will be grounded to your room. Do you understand me? Yes. Dawn D responded as she then crossed her arms and stared down to the floor. Quit pouting, brush your teeth, get dressed and then come up for breakfast. You've got 10 minutes. Immediately Ron turned and walked out of the room. Approximately 30 minutes later, both Nicole and Belinda were headed out of the house with the 3 young children. Macaulay and Dawn D to their first year of kindergarten and then Lucifer into the 4th grade. Come on now guys, Belinda said as they pulled up to the Sunset Elementary School, let's get this over with. Hey Belinda, Nicole said as she opened up the back seat door to the Hummer, how about you guys go on in and get registered? I'm gonna take Lucifer into his class and then meet you right afterwards. Alright. But Nicole. Yeah? Nicole asked, as she looked back over her shoulder. She had held Lucifer's hand as he too had stayed up late the previous night and required some coercion to move towards the red, tin-roofed, brick building. How long do you think that we'll be here today? Belinda asked as she reached out towards her daughter to pull out a wrinkle from her shirt. Well, it'll probably take about an hour or so. I don't remember, but I'm sure that it took less than a couple of hours when Malachi took Lucifer to school on his first year. Well, I guess that would be plenty of reason for us to stay then. Right? Actually Belinda, Nicole continued just as they reached the front door of the building, most of the teachers' talking is gonna be directed towards us parents today. The kids will end up playing quietly. As she said this she darted her vision towards her nephew as Macaulay instantly looked down towards the ground, out of the way of the parents and teacher. As she finished her sentence, she opened the door with one hand and then, as she still held her sons in the other, she patted Macaulay on the top of the head. Just as Nicole had explained, the teacher did in fact address the discussion to the parents as the children, or most of the children, played somewhat quietly in the rear of the room. During this moment of play Macaulay had met a girl, close to his own age, named Lovisa Jewel. Belinda's attention was drawn to them when the young girl had questioned Macaulay about his teeth. Then, just short of 2 hours into the teacher-slash-parent discussion, Nicole and Lucifer had walked into the room hand in hand. So, Nicole began as they walked out of the classroom, are you gonna be prepared for committing yourself to making sure that both, Macaulay and Dawn D, are on their way to school on time each morning? Well, I guess, if Ronnie will get them up, dressed, fed, and out the door, Belinda said with a slight grin on her face. Now Belinda. We can't shove all of the work onto the guys, Nicole said as she smiled back at Belinda. The only real problem is when you get to the point that you're having to defend Macaulay, from his peers, over the difference in his teeth. Are you serious? Belinda asked and then simultaneously stopped walking. Right in the middle of the street. As Lucifer, Dawn D, and Macaulay had reached the Hummer, they then looked back at Belinda as they watched her as she stood in the road. Yeah. It's hard to deal with sometimes but we, as parents, have gotta stand up for them. Children are evil Belinda, Nicole continued and then instantly turned to her left as a car quickly turned a corner. Suddenly, in what seemed like the same second, she found her son pulling her, by the hand, off towards the side of the road as her daughter stood in the road, between Belinda and the oncoming vehicle. All, within that same split second, the squealing sound, of the brakes of the speeding car slammed, causing Nicole and Lucifer to instantly look towards the little 5-year-old girl. Dawn D. Everyone, except Lucifer and Macaulay, shouted all at once. The car then stopped within inches of Dawn D. She hadn't even flinched as the driver quickly climbed out and stared at the small hill. Then, as the driver continued to look at Dawn D turned to face her mom and brother. Seconds later, As the speedy driver still Starguy caught Dundee, the little girl walked off of the road towards her mother. "Are you alright, Mom?" Macaulay asked as he still clung onto her hand. Watching the man climb back into his car, Belinda then looked down to her son. "Yeah. Yes, Macaulay. I'm alright." "Hey, Belinda." Nicole called out towards her sister-in-law. "Wouldn't you agree that making sure that they're up, dressed, fed, and out the door for school is a very small detail to tend to?" "Yeah. I do agree to that. I'll just need Ronnie's help on the days that I don't have off from the city hall," Belinda responded as she wrapped her arms around the kids and then, with caution, continued to cross the road to the Hummer. Later that evening, after Belinda and Nicole had woken Ronnie, Malachi, Angel, and Eddie up early, approximately 4 o'clock, the guys, along with Macaulay, Dundee, and Lucifer and their mothers, they all went out to dinner at the mini mall, next door to the Safeway grocery store. Then, before they had left for home, Ronnie purchased 2 more dogs to add to those already at the house. One for Macaulay and then one for himself. Before walking out of the mall, however, they had bought a ferret for Dundee. Surprisingly, based off of the first of Macaulay's and Dundee's experience into kindergarten, the children did find themselves in a routine that had also trained their parents' sleeping schedule. Then, just as school had become the normal task, the season was soon coming to an end the following May. Then, once again, the school season of that fall had everyone scrambling for that much-needed routine again. "Hey Dad," Macaulay said as his father had woken him up early. "Can I get new shoes?" Still sitting on his mattress, of the top bunk, Ronnie quickly tied his son's shoes that happened to be so new that the price tag was still attached to the side of the size 6. "New shoes?" "Macaulay," Ronnie said as he quickly grasped the rubber band that attached the tag to the shoe. Ronnie was standing beside the bunk bed with his upper chest rested against the ladder. "What do you think that these are?" "But I don't like the color on them," the 6-year-old cried. Macaulay had said that he wanted Power Ranger shoes of which they had purchased. Then, a couple days later, the kid found that there was a pink-colored pinstripe going down the entire length of the outside of the shoes. "Tell you what, Macaulay," Ronnie said as he gave in. "Let's go ahead and put these in the box. Then, after you get out of school for the day." "Dad," Macaulay interrupted, "I'm only gonna be at school for a couple hours today. That's how it is on the first day." "Yeah. I forgot about that," Ronnie said as he then put one hand over his forehead. "And," Macaulay pressed, "you told Mom that you would take us today since she took us last year with Aunt Nicole." After reminding his father, Macaulay saw his dad instantly look down towards the bottom bunk. "Lucifer. It's time to get up for school," Ron said and then bent down to the bottom bunk as he pulled the blanket off of the 10-year-old. "But Uncle Ronnie." "I'm tired," Lucifer said and then, with the same breath, pulled the cover back over his head. Still crept down, over Lucifer's bed, Ron responded by grabbing the entire blanket, with the sheet, and removing them from the bed. Instantly Lucifer curled up, into the fetal position, and wrapping his pillow tightly around his face, as to block out the bedroom light. "Come on. Please, Uncle Ronnie." "Nope. I said that it's time to get up and out of bed. And that means right now, Lucifer." Just as Ronnie finished speaking, Malachi walked into the room only wearing boxers. "Lucifer. I know that I just heard your Uncle Ron tell you to get up." Malachi spoke as he too approached the bed. Walking around his brother, Malachi then bent over his son and picked him up off of the bed, with both hands, and then held him over the floor, at his own waist height, until Lucifer extended his legs for his dad to set him down. "Now you've got 5 minutes to get dressed. Do you understand me?" "Yes." Lucifer pouted. "Hey Ronnie," Malachi said in a much softer tone of voice. "I forgot that Lucifer starts middle school this year. Since you can't be in 2 places at once, I'm gonna drive Lucifer in. Okay?" "Good. I didn't even think about that. I better go get Dundee up." Then, as Ron turned to face his son, he picked the boy up off of the bunk, and set him down on the floor. "We'll replace your shoes right after school. Okay?" "All right, Dad." "Thank you," Macaulay said and then ran out of the room and down the hallway. Just before leaving the room, Ronnie looked back towards his brother and then Lucifer. Good luck. He's a little grouchy this morning. Yeah, Malachi responded and then looked back down, towards his son, as he still stood in the center of the room. Lucifer. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. It's up to you, but I'm gonna make the choice if you don't get moving real quickly, Malachi said in an extremely firm voice. As to this point, in Lucifer's life, Malachi nor Nicole had ever had to impose any physical discipline onto their only child. Over the previous week, however, Lucifer had been pressing his luck as his parents fought to put his sleeping schedule back to that was proper for the school season. Only for 3 more years. Nicole would say to persuade her son. About 45 minutes later both Ronnie and Malachi were pulling out of the garage in their individual Hummers. As they pulled out of the driveway, bumper to bumper, Ronnie led the way down Finley Lane. Then seconds later Malachi turned left and then began to drive up the northern direction side of Finley Lane, then, moments later, turned right, onto 9th, to head towards the middle school. This year was the first time for Ronnie, as a father, to interact directly with his children's teacher. Walking into the school, however, had brought back memories involving his friend James. Macaulay's and Dondi's teacher, Mrs. Garrett, was pleased to see Ronnie. She had remembered him as a past student from nearly 20 years earlier. Now, she was meeting his children who seemed, to her, to be just as happy and jolly as their father was when he was their age. During the time that the parents were talking to the teacher, Macaulay played, just outside of the classroom, in the hallway with a child that was just starting kindergarten. The kids were playing quietly and so Ronnie allowed his son to continue playing, thinking that maybe this would be enough reason, to Macaulay, to not fight, like his older cousin, while getting up and moving early in the morning. "What's your name?" the younger child asked as they had both settled down after his new friend had skinned his elbow on the floor. "Bobby. John." "What's yours?" the younger child asked as he looked at a smear of blood on his arm. "Macaulay." "That's my dad and my sister," Macaulay continued as he pointed towards his father. "Macaulay. Why are your teeth so big?" Bobby John asked as he carefully reached out and touched the tip of Macaulay's right side canine. "I don't know. Everyone in my family, except for the girls, have big canine teeth." For the most part Macaulay told the truth. He had been told several times, in the past, to not say anything about his teeth, to anyone. Yet, with what little he actually knew, at his young age, he didn't really have enough knowledge to tell anyone anything except for a birth deformity that had plagued all of the males within his family. Then, before Bobby John even had a chance to continue talking, Macaulay had suddenly been caught off guard of a strong smell that nearly caused him to drool. Macaulay instantly traced the source of the scent towards his friend's elbow where a line of blood began to run down the length of Bobby John's arm. "Hey," Macaulay said as he pointed at the run of blood, "can I smell that for a second?" "Smell it? What are you? Crazy?" Bobby John asked, thinking that his peer had to be joking. "Actually, I'm very serious. From here it smells good," Macaulay said as he began to lean forward towards Bobby John's arm. Giving in, Malachi's friend moved his bloody elbow towards his face. Lightly, Macaulay took Bobby John's arm up, in his own hand, and then put his nose close to the cut. Simultaneously his drooling began to increase. "Hey," he then said as he momentarily took his nose away from his friend's arm. "Can I lick this?" "Dude. You're weird. But yes. If you really want, go right ahead," Bobby John said and then looked away as Lucifer began to manipulate his arm, within his own hands. Seconds later, Bobby John felt the wetness of Lucifer's tongue touch his elbow. Soon afterwards he then felt his peer's lips sealed over the sore. Ronnie had enjoyed the group discussion with his children's teacher. This particular teacher seemed more organized than the teacher of the previous year. While listening to the conversation and then, once in a while, coming up with questions of his own, he hadn't realized, until about an hour into the parent-slash-teacher meeting, that he could no longer see his son playing outside of the classroom. In response, he knelt down, to pick up his daughter, and then walked out into the school's hallway. As he began to approach a set of shelves, designed for the kids to use as a coat rack and store their lunch boxes, he could then hear his son's voice. As Macaulay continued to nurse on Bobby John's arm, he carefully used the end of his tongue to tear deeper into the abrasion. At best, he could only get enough to fulfill the taste that he was quickly becoming more and more fond of. "This feels funny," Bobby John whispered into Macaulay's ear and then positioned his own head so that he could get a better view of what he was doing. "Macaulay!" Ronnie loudly gasped. Scared by the sudden shout, Macaulay almost instantly jumped up to H's feet as he had immediately wiped his mouth with his arm. "Wha? What, Dad?" This was, to Ronnie's knowledge, the first time that his son had ever consumed raw blood. Nevertheless, however, school was not the place for it. "What are you doing, son?" Ron asked as he bent over, with Dondi over his shoulder, and held his hand on Macaulay's arm. "You're not supposed to do that in school." "Not in school?" Bobby John thought to himself. "I didn't think that you were supposed to do that anywhere. His whole family is weird." "Kid, what's your name?" Ronnie asked as he looked at the confused-looking child. "Bobby John." "Well, Bobby John," Ronnie continued, "please don't tell anyone about this. All right?" "Okay." The boy answered, "Who would I want to tell about this? I'm not the strange one here." Bobby John continued his thought. Compared to earlier that day, Lucifer had changed his attitude towards the first day of being in his new school. This school was bigger and also it looked as though there were more exciting options for classes. Plus, to top it all off, Tommy was still in his class, just as in the past. For the first time, for both Lucifer and Tommy, they would have to walk back and forth between different subjects of education rather than staying stationary as a single teacher would teach several subjects. This did create some limited confusion for both Lucifer and Tommy, yet they were both happy with the new subjects available. For Lucifer, his favorite was anthropology, of which would be held in a upstairs classroom. As opposed to the elementary school, the first day of middle school was more of a teacher-slash-student-based introduction rather than the usual teacher-slash-parent meeting. Just within moments, the attitude between Malachi and Lucifer had improved a lot in just a short period of time. "Hey, Mr. Declue," Tommy said as he stood beside his mother. "Yeah, Tommy?" Malachi asked as he smiled at Mrs. Russell. Malachi had often found that his own former classmate had stared at him frequently when they shared times at school functions or when the boys spent the night at each other's houses. Sometimes, though Malachi would blow it off as being his imagination, when Nicole wasn't present, it had seemed that Mrs. Russell would flirt with him. "Would it be alright if I stayed with Lucifer for the night?" the young boy asked, and then looked up to Malachi with big puppy dog eyes that had often won his way with Malachi. Really, Malachi preferred to have Tom around his son all of the time, or at least as much as possible, due to the fact that there wasn't anyone within their home Lucifer's age, nor did they have any nearby neighbors that were his son's age. Now, at home, Lucifer nor Tommy had the ability to see Lloyd, James, nor Sterling outside of a seance. "Yes, Tom. Of course you can spend the night. Remember, Tommy, that a long time ago that I told you that you wouldn't need our permission anymore to spend the night. You've just got to ask your mother." "All right. Thank you," Tommy replied just as him and Lucifer both quietly cheered. Then, both Lucifer and Tommy ran out of the school and out to the parking lot of the school. Walking out of the building, with Tommy's mom, Malachi was very thankful that the weather had remained overcast outdoors. "So," Mrs. Russell spoke up, "do you ever get any time away from the wife and kids?" "If I really wanted it I could," Malachi instantly countered, "but I'm devoted to my wife and son." After saying this, Malachi looked up into the woman's face. "I'm sorry, Malachi. I didn't mean." "Don't worry about it, Mrs. Russell. I'm not angry. If anything, I'm flattered by the gesture. But I just love and respect my wife enough to not fool around," Malachi said as he smiled at her. "Well, thank you for not being upset at me. You know," she continued as she began to look across the parking lot as Lucifer and Tom played in the grass, "there's something about you, Eddie, your brother, your nephew, and Lucifer that seemed to make you guys real special. I saw it in you when you and I were in elementary school together. And you're honest and point blank. You don't beat around the bush. Honesty prevents problems, Mrs. Russell. If something is wrong at home, that means that you need to think on the basis of the roots of your marriage. What brought you and Mr. Russell together? As they continued to talk to one another, they stood beside the Hummer as they watched the kids play. What's more important? The roots that brought you to that relationship and the sole reason that Tommy exists? Or a small insignificant moment that could take away everything that you love in this life? Looking up to Malachi's face, she offered a small smile. I guess that I better work on my marriage a little, she said as her eyes watered up. Sometimes, Malachi continued. You have to water those roots or the plant will die right before your eyes. As Malachi went on, she looked down to the ground. Sometimes bad things happen to us that seem to remove the nutrition from those roots. But, reaching out to left side of her chin, to where they were, once again, looking each other eye to eye, he finished, sometimes we have to take a close look at the circumstances that planted that seed, and realize that after all the work it took for those roots to grow, that plant is worth grooming once in a while. How about we let Tommy stay at our house for a while? We'll follow you to your house and get plenty of clothes and toys for him. While he's with us, you fix your marriage. Don't rush. That could make it worse. Tom can stay with us indefinitely. All right? As Malachi paused, Mrs. Russell was crying as she wiped her face dry with her sleeve. To help, Malachi lightly hugged her and then held on to that hug until she calmed down. Thank you so much, Malachi. You're a lifesaver. You're welcome, he said, and then looked over towards the kids and yelled. Lucifer and Tommy. Let's go, guys. Moments later, as they were following Mrs. Russell down the road, Malachi pulled his cell phone out of his pocket, and then hushed the boys. Hey Nicole. Hi honey. How did the school stuff work out? Nicole asked as she walked out into the kitchen for a cup of coffee. Well, actually it went well. But I just volunteered us for something that I know that I should have asked you about first, Malachi continued as he turned the wheel around a corner and then quickly sped up to Mrs. Russell's car again. Suddenly, both Tommy and Lucifer were now listening to the one-sided conversation. Well, what did you get us into, honey? Nicole suddenly began to allow some worst-case scenarios race through her mind. Because of a problem at the Russell residence, I've agreed to allow Tommy to move in with us. Well, that isn't any real problem. As Malachi and Nicole continued to talk together, both of the boys, in the back seat, instantly became excited, yet had also remained quiet enough to further their snooping into the phone conversation. It took a bit longer than what Malachi had predicted to his wife, nothing less. However, in about 2 hours he was assisting Tommy and Lucifer to bring in loads of clothes and a few toys. Hey Tom. Malachi spoke up as he held the last load of clothing in his arms. Yeah? Do you have any more toys than this? In total, Malachi figured that he was looking at a total of about a dozen toys. This included a small handful of Power Rangers and a board game. Just the PlayStation games and DVDs, Tommy said as he had also seemed to have to think about Malachi's question. Oh yeah. I have my bike at home still. Well, Malachi continued, we'll pick that up next time that we head that way. Okay? Alright. And thank you, Mr. DeClue, Tommy said as he then also smiled at Lucifer's father. Tommy seemed to have a generally natural smile on his face at all times. It was often normal for someone, who may be just passing Tommy, to take a double look at him as his smile would always draw interest. Tommy, Malachi said as he put his hand on his son's friend's shoulder. You can call me Malachi and my wife, or Lucifer's mom, Nicole. You're not just a visite anymore. You live here. As he finished speaking, he then leaned forward and hugged Tommy as well. It had seemed almost odd that Tom had fitted right into the family setting. Of course, he had previously spent a lot of time with the household before officially moving in. Therefore, for the most part, everything was going as normal. As Christmas of 2029 rolled around, the DeClues had thought for sure that Tommy's family would have reclaimed their child. Then, as Christmas Eve arrived, Malachi decided that it was time to call the Russell residence. When he did call, however, he was confronted by a recording that said, "You have dialed a number that is no longer in service. Please hang up and try again." "Honey," Malachi said to his wife as he sat on the edge of the bed and pressed the disconnect button to the cell phone. "I think that I'm gonna have to head over there and see them in person." "All right, dear." Nicole answered, "You do that and I'll get breakfast going," Nicole said, and then uncovered herself and then stood up. "Hey Ronnie, Eddie, and Angel." Malachi thought as clearly as he could with his ESP. "How would you like to go out with me for a quick flight? I need to see if Tommy's family still lives around here." Malachi joked. Actually, in the back of Malachi's mind, he had began to wonder if they had in fact moved. The last time that Tommy's family had called was in October. "I can't get a hold of them by phone." Almost instantly, Ronnie stepped out of the bedroom and announced that he would be ready in about 5 minutes. All within that very moment, he had received similar responses from both Eddie and Angel through ESP. "Hey Angel," Eddie said just as they stepped out of their room, "you might want something other than your leather coat. It's nearly 40 below outside." "Nah. I'll be alright. We're not going far," Angel said as he then led the way upstairs and into the kitchen. As they entered the kitchen, they found Nicole brewing some coffee as Ronnie was putting on his coat. "Ron," Eddie gasped as he watched Ronnie put his coat on without a shirt, "are you and Angel both crazy or something? It's nearly 40 below outside and you are both dressed for a breeze within the summer air." "It's alright Eddie," Ron said as he put his hand on his shoulder, "we're not going very far." "Deja vu," Eddie thought out loud. "You guys ready?" Malachi asked as he walked into the kitchen. Then, before anyone answered, he pulled on a sweatshirt and then picked up a pre-poured cup of coffee. "Day-old coffee," Malachi said, and then pulled on a black stretch hat that matched his black sweatshirt. "Hey. I think that Angel's personal dress code is beginning to rub off on you, Malachi," Eddie said jokingly. "All that you need now is a leather coat." "Nah," Malachi said as he looked down towards his chest and belly, "we're not going far. This will do." Slightly startled by his Uncle Ron hollering down the hall, saying that he would be ready, for something, in 5 minutes, Lucifer turned over, onto his side, to find himself face to face with Tom as he continued to sleep. Taking a deep breath, puckering up his lips, Lucifer then blew lightly into Tommy's face, causing his hair to shoot back towards his ears. He repeated this a couple of times before he decided to change up his method of distracting his friend. Carefully, and slowly, Lucifer reached out, with his right arm, towards the side of Tom's head. Then, with just his index finger, Lucifer lightly rubbed the entire edge of Tommy's left ear lobe. Suddenly Tom swiped his left hand over his ear, causing Lucifer to find another way to irritate his friend. Once again, using his right index finger, Lucifer gently rubbed Tom's left eyelash. Though it took a moment, soon Tom had suddenly swept away Lucifer's hand again. Now, with true intentions on waking his friend up, he used another method to gently, and less intrusive, to awake his best friend. This time, again with his right hand, carefully placed his hand, fully spread out, on Tommy's bare chest. Though this too caused a slow reaction, from Tom, at least this reaction was soft and gentle as Tommy opened his eyes staring back at Lucifer. "Hey you," Tommy said as he focused his eyes, "how are you doing?" "I'm doing alright," Lucifer responded, and then removed his hand from Tom's chest as he then rubbed back Tom's sideburn, in front of his left ear. With this, they both continued to lay down and stare at one another. Opening up the kitchen sliding glass door, Malachi, Ronnie, Eddie, and Angel each stepped out onto the porch and then individually took to flight, grouping together just over the roof of their own home. "So, where does Tommy's parents live?" Angel said as he shifted his direction to face him. "On the higher end of School Street. On the other end of the Sand Rocks. Opposite of that is closer to the trailer park." As Malachi answered Angel, they all began to float towards the Sand Rocks as they had also gained an elevation. "Hey! Look over there," Eddie said as they were approaching the halfway mark of the Sand Rocks. "I remember falling down off of that ledge. I also remember how much of my life seemed to go through my mind within that one fall too. Until I caught you. Malachi remarked as he looked back towards his friend. I wouldn't have let you hit the ground. Soon, the four of them were hovering over Tommy's parents' house. Hey Malachi, Ron said, how about you go through the front door, Angel? You go through the rear door, Eddie, you go through that window right there. As Ron said this he pointed at an upstairs window that was accessible from the roof, and I'll go through a downstairs window. With this said, Ron softly landed on the ground, in front of a window that was furthest from the doors to the house. Landing as quietly as possible, on the front porch, Malachi then peered through a diamond-shaped window. What Malachi could see was only complete darkness as he had also placed his hand, protected by his glove, on the door handle. Initially, when Malachi turned the door handle, he found it to be locked. Then, after pulling out his American Express card, he placed the card between the door and the door jamb just as the door suddenly popped open, startling Malachi. He found himself staring at Angel. Hey Malachi. The back door was unlocked. Malachi and Angel were soon interrupted by the sound of broken glass and then Ronnie's voice. Hey guys. I'm in. Looking into the direction of the sound of Ron's voice and the shatter of glass, Angel simultaneously searched the wall, near the front door, for a light switch. Where are you guys? Ron's voice could be heard again. We're out here, Ronnie, Malachi said as he also realized that there was no furniture in the living room of the house. Then, as Malachi turned to face Angel, whom was flicking a switch back and forth, he continued, no power, is there? Nope. Only us in this empty house, Angel said, then suddenly turned, with Ronnie and Malachi, as they heard Eddie find his way to the bottom of the stairs. Hey guys. There isn't anyone living here. They've disappeared, Eddie said as he then looked down to the floor. At least my parents said goodbye. Poor Tommy. With this said, Eddie looked up to Malachi. Well. I guess that this means that he stays with us, Malachi said. As Tom and Lucifer continued to stare at one another, they both could hear Nicole and Belinda moving around, in the kitchen, with Macaulay and Dondi. They must be making breakfast, Tommy said just after they heard what sounded like plates being set out on the table. Yeah. And it's beginning to smell like eggs, toast, and sausage, Lucifer said as he retracted his hand from the side of Tom's head and softly touched his neck. Soon, both Tom and Lucifer climbed out of bed, got dressed, and then found their way out to the kitchen. Hey guys, Nicole said as she saw her son out of the corner of her eye, I hope that you two are ready to eat a big breakfast. We've got a lot. Nicole finished as she had quickly pulled herself, away from the cooking, to hug both Lucifer and Tom as they stood beside one another. Shortly after, both Tom and Lucifer were seated at the table with Macaulay and Dondi. Then, just as Nicole and Belinda sat down, the kitchen's sliding glass door opened as Malachi, Ronnie, Eddie, and Angel walked in. With them, all four children instantly became chilled. Daddy. Dondi complained, it's cold outside. Close the door. Just as the 6-year-old finished her sentence, the door was, once again, securely latched. Hey guys, Malachi said to Ronnie, Eddie, and Angel, how about you guys sit down and eat? Nicole, I need to speak to you, honey. Malachi finished and then stood by the entrance to the kitchen as he waited on his wife. Seconds later, as Nicole came to his side, they both headed down the hallway and then into their bedroom. What's going on, honey? Nicole asked as the bedroom door closed behind them. Tommy's family is nowhere to be found. They're gone. Their house is empty. No notes. And no warning. As Malachi spoke, Nicole covered her mouth as she also sat down on the bed. Oh, that poor child, Nicole said as she then looked up to her husband. How can they? I don't know, honey. I don't know. Sitting beside Nicole, Malachi then wrapped his arms around her. I do know, however, that we need to be there for Tommy. We need to plan on a long-term stay, for him, in our home. Well. Nicole began in a quiet tone of voice, I think that perhaps that we have already made him part of our family. We do, however, while there is still time, need to buy more Christmas presents for him. Looking at his watch, just as Nicole had questioned the remaining time to buy presents, he realized that there was only about 2 hours left of Christmas Eve remaining. Kmart will probably stay open until midnight. Country General. I doubt that it will be. Well, honey. Nicole interrupted, I think that we all need to plan another outing for tonight. Standing, as she continued to speak to her husband, I'll have Eddie and Angel babysit Macaulay, Don D., Lucifer, and Tommy, while you, Ronnie, Belinda, and I all drive down to Kmart. Come on, hun. Nicole pushed as she held her hand out to him as he still sat on the mattress. To do this right, we can't afford to wait. Looking her husband in the face, she watched a smile replace the look of worry that she had seen when the guys had returned home 10 minutes prior. As tradition, to the Declue family, at about 7 o'clock in the evening, while everyone else was still asleep, the kids, Lucifer, Macaulay, Don D., and Angel, would awake, to get their Christmas stockings, and then go through their stockings, together, before waking their parents, or the rest of the household approximately an hour early. This tradition had started with Malachi and Ronnie while they were still young. The only real difference is, in this particular year, is that now Tommy was also included. To go along with this yearly tradition was the children would also, all together, sleep in the same room. Then, after sorting through their stockings, they went to go and wake up their parents and then watch as they too would go through their stockings. Soon afterwards everyone would gather around the Christmas tree as they all opened their presents. For Tommy this Christmas would be one that he would never forget. He seemed to not even question the whereabouts of his parents as the holiday came and then gone. There were moments when Malachi, Nicole, Ronnie, Belinda, and Eddie had questioned themselves to rather if they should say something to Tom or not. The end decision, however, came down to an agreement that when, and if, Tommy would ask about his family that he would be filled in with the fullest honest answers as possible. As New Year's rolled around, Tommy had found that the only thing that could be considered tradition, in the Declue's family, is watching the countdown on television. And that was exactly what everyone in the house did. Gathered up all together, in the living room, and watched as the crystal ball dropped on Times Square. Without any indication towards his feelings of not seeing, or hearing anything about his family, Tommy was extremely happy, however, with his living situation with his new family. Happy New Year's, Tom, Lucifer said as he leaned over and whispered into his friend's ear. Happy New Year's to you too, Lucifer. Tom replied as they sat beside each other on the couch. Then, on the cushion, between each other, where nobody else could see, they held each other's hand as they watched the new year printed on the television screen in big numbers, 2030. Hey Macaulay. Sterling said as he walked into the kid's bedroom. Macaulay had just woken up, at about 9:20 in the evening, as Lucifer and Tom both remained in their bunk. Good morning, Sterling. The 6-year-old responded as he struggled to pull up a sock. He was sitting on the bottom rung of the bunk bed ladder as he leaned forward. Would you like to learn a math trick? The 16-year-old asked as he came over to and stood beside Macaulay. A trick? Sure. All right. Now Macaulay, I want you to pick a number. Any number, but don't tell me. All right? All right. I've got one, Macaulay said as he then finished putting on his socks. Okay. Now, I want you to take that number and multiply it by 2. All right. I've done that, he said as he then smiled as well. Now, add 10 to it. Seconds later Macaulay nodded as he completed this task. Divide that number in half. All right. Okay. Now I want you to take that number and subtract your original number from it. The one that you picked earlier. Okay. I've got that. And your answer at 5. Sterling interrupted. Wow. How did you know that? Macaulay asked as he instantly tried to remember Sterling's instructions to this trick. I wanna try that trick on some of my friends at school. Well, that's one way to surprise them, Sterling said as he then looked towards Lucifer and Tom as they continued to sleep. They both faced the wall, Tommy closest with Lucifer right behind him. With his nose in Tom's hair, on the back of his head, he draped his arm over Tommy's rib cage. Between the two, one of them was snoring. Too bad that they can't see you anymore, Macaulay said as he stood beside Sterling, It used to be fun and we were all able to learn from you, Lloyd, and James, Macaulay said as he too watched his cousin and friend. Well, Macaulay. To some extent you can all still learn from us. Each time that we do a séance. Also, you and Don D can do things like repeating the math trick that I just did with you. In a way, that would be teaching coming from me. Through you. Yeah. I didn't think of that, Macaulay said in a real quiet tone of voice. Then turned away from his sleeping roommates as he looked down toward the floor. What's wrong? Nothing wrong. Just wondering, Macaulay said as he turned his head towards Sterling to show that he was in fact okay. Wondering about what? Angel. I can't help but wonder why he looks the same age as Tommy and Lucifer when he's like. Pausing as he thought about his age, 21 years old. Well. No two people are the same, Macaulay. Angel is a full-blooded Mexican as opposed to just your. Well, let's see. Your mom is full-blooded, but your dad is only half. Which means that you're 3/4 Mexican. You see, Mexicans are naturally shorter people. Sterling. Macaulay interrupted, I realize that I may be only 6 years old, but Angel, besides his body size, looks only 10 in the face. He doesn't grow hair where other adults do. His voice sounds like another kid. For nearly 2 minutes Macaulay had gone on and on of the differences within Angel. Even, to himself, Sterling knew that Macaulay was right. For the sake of teaching Macaulay to not become biased, however, or make judgmental decisions based off of these differences, Sterling pushed, for Angel's sake, by saying that there was nothing wrong with Angel's differences. It was about 3.5 months into the new year when Tommy, Lucifer, and Macaulay had all woken up early. Only about an hour early, however, they were up much earlier than the rest of the household. At first Macaulay wasn't sure if he was the only one awake or not. So, just to see if, by chance his roommates were also awake, he put his head over the edge of the top bunk and looked down. Looking over the edge, Macaulay had accidentally startled both Tommy and Lucifer. Though he hadn't made any noise as he looked downward, just his sudden presence had caught the two off guard as they, or actually, Tommy, had thrown his body backwards, towards the wall and off of Lucifer. Simultaneously Lucifer and Tommy had quickly thrown a cover, on each other, as to hide themselves, with an exception of their heads, from Macaulay. Deciding to join Lucifer and Tommy, rather than remaining on his own bed, where he was beginning to feel lightheaded from looking down below, Macaulay climbed down the ladder to their bunk. Can I play two guys? The 6-year-old asked. Looking at each other, before giving an answer, Tommy then looked back to Macaulay. Sure you can, Tom said as Lucifer opened up the edge of the bed sheet inviting his cousin. Warning though. The bed bugs bite down here, he joked as he watched Macaulay climb in beside Lucifer. As Macaulay climbed into the sheets, he quickly found that both Tommy and Lucifer were dressed just the same as himself. Only pajama bottoms. Then, as all three of them had also covered their heads under the sheets, Tommy crawled over, on top of Lucifer's chest, and looked down at Macaulay. Though they had all shared the same bedroom with each other for a long time, Tommy had been curious as to rather if Macaulay's canines were just as sharp as Lucifer's. Then, as he laid the side of his head down on Lucifer's chest, he reached towards Macaulay's face, slowly with his index finger, and then lightly touched the point of his tooth. Wow, Tom gasped quietly. His teeth are just as sharp as yours, Lucifer. Not only his, silly. My dad's, my Uncle Ronnie's, my Uncle Eddie's, and our cousin Angel's. Lucifer spoke quietly at the top of Tom's head as he still laid on his chest. I wonder how it would feel to have both of them harvest off of me. Tommy thought to himself. Twice as much as it feels to have one harvest off of you, Macaulay said as he stared back at Tom. Lucifer could feel Tom's body seem to flinch as he listened to Macaulay's response. What are you talking about? Tommy asked as he raised his head up off of Lucifer's chest. Tommy. Lucifer began to answer for his cousin, there is something else that you'll learn about us. What's that? Tom interrupted. We have ESP, of which allows us to read the mind of someone that is thinking about us. Anytime and every time that you think about us, we know it. We can read those thoughts just the same as we can hear your spoken words. With his head raised, just a couple of inches above Lucifer's chest, Tom looked into his friend's eyes. "Well, try this one then. I love you." Immediately Tom felt Lucifer's response as he tightly hugged him and did not use any words at all. Then, with the shrug of Lucifer's arms, Tom laid his head back onto his bare chest. "Okay guys." Macaulay interrupted the moment of closeness. "What do you guys wanna do?" As he completed his question, he quickly rolled over, onto his side, and then wrapped his arms around the two. Quickly, just jokingly, Tommy turned his head and carefully grabbed Macaulay's ear lobe within his own teeth. Without biting too hard, he only bit down hard enough to prevent Macaulay from moving. "Using you as a chew toy sounds like a plan," Tommy thought as clearly as he could towards Macaulay. Tilting his head forward, Lucifer quickly stuck his canines into the side of Tommy's neck as he had also held onto his upper torso with his arms. Shocked by the friendly attack, Tommy let go of his grip onto Macaulay's ear. Doing this, however, he made sure that he hadn't turned his own head in any way that might cause Lucifer's teeth to tear his skin. As he continued to lay there with his friend's teeth within his neck as his friends also held his arms tightly around him, he decided that he wanted this horseplay to continue but in a way that he too could get an upper hand. Though all the wrestling and rough horseplay was exactly just that, way too often, in the past, both Macaulay and Lucifer would gang up to where, in the end, Tommy would lose. There were times, however, that Angel would also entertain himself with playing with the three younger children, sometimes four when Dondi would participate, and when he did, most often he would defend Tommy. Tommy decided that the best way that he could get the upper hand and protect himself at the same time, would be to use his own arms to tightly hold onto Lucifer's body as to prevent his canines from moving and then slowly move off of the bed. Tommy also knew, however, that he would have to get himself and Lucifer over Macaulay. Without saying anything, or thinking anything that Lucifer may be able to understand. With these thoughts in mind, Tommy carefully tried to barrel roll his body, with Lucifer's, up and over Macaulay's body towards the floor. The result, however, was Macaulay tightly wrapping his arms around them again, from behind Tommy, to where Tom was now sandwiched between them. As they continued to play hard, Tommy's mind would often go back to the past to when he didn't ever have someone to play with. He remembered a couple of years back, at the start of kindergarten, when he had first met Lucifer and Jason. He had wished so much for playmates that it was much more of a gift than what anyone else could have ever given him. Now, with his best friends constantly around him, he could only hope and pray that this love and joy would never come to an end. Without being able to see Macaulay, due to the fact that he wasn't born with eyes on the back on his head, he now put all of his strength into a barrel roll again. This time, he was able to shift both Macaulay's and Lucifer's body weights enough to make a roll all the way over to the wooden frame of the bed. Once they had reached the frame, however, the roll had come to a stop with Macaulay now on the bottom, Lucifer on the top, and of course, Tommy still in the middle. Now what do I do? Tommy questioned himself again. He didn't have to think for very long to realize that the wooden frame, to the bed, was the primary problem. I don't weigh enough to roll all three of us. Tom continued to think, and then suddenly an idea came to mind. My weight and Lucifer's weight. With this thought, Tommy then wrapped his legs around Lucifer's and then rolled Lucifer's body towards the edge of the bed, causing all three of them to come crashing down to the floor. Once again, with Lucifer on the bottom. In mid-air, between the edge of the bed and the floor, Tommy had instantly worried about injury. Though he was having fun, for that one split second, he had tightened about every muscle within his body, putting an extreme squeeze onto Lucifer. In return, Tommy also felt Macaulay lose his hold. At first, as Macaulay lost his grip, he was holding tightly onto his cousin and Tommy. Through the fall, however, when he had momentarily lost his hold, causing himself to fall separate from the other two boys and down onto his chest, beside the bunk bed, he quickly threw himself back up to his feet, then he turned around and grabbed a hold of Tommy from behind. As Lucifer still had his teeth sunk in the side of Tom's neck, Macaulay then opened his jaws wide open and sunk his teeth deep into the tissues of the back of Tom's neck. The way that Macaulay had his teeth attached to Tommy's neck made him feel as though his mouth was locked onto his friend's neck. He was able to open his mouth wide enough to where the backside of Tommy's neck had slipped in beyond Macaulay's canines. In other words, if Macaulay were to release himself from Tom's neck, it would be a minor struggle to do so. Then, as Macaulay began to nurse, he was quite literally eye to eye with Lucifer as he stared back at him. Lucifer, as he stared back towards his cousin, opened his jaws as he relocated himself differently upon Tom's collarbone, on the same side of Tom's body as Macaulay was harvesting off from. Now, as Lucifer was almost nose to nose with Macaulay, Lucifer too was now locked onto Tom as his bottom jaw was under the collarbone and his canines were locked on the interior side of the top of the hard bone. As both Macaulay and Lucifer continued, it had almost seemed as though they were competing with one another as they continued their direct eye contact. All that Tommy could hear was the two boys as they seemed to struggle to breath. After a while it had seemed that their breathing was paced together. Moments had come when they both had paused to listen for sound, then, just as abruptly as they had stopped, they continued once again. This whole experience seemed real strange to Tommy. He was in a kneeling position standing on his knees as the body weight of both of his friends seemed to keep him up erect in the air. There was a moment when Tommy, himself, had thought that he had heard someone coming. In fact, back in his mind, he knew for sure that he had heard Ronnie's bedroom door open down the hall from their room. With all that Tom had thought for sure that he had heard, he couldn't get over the most uplifting feeling that he was experiencing. So, rather than questioning his hearing, he chose to just allow his friend to continue to harvest. Seconds later, as nobody had knocked on the door nor come into the room, he had completely put off the noises that he thought that he had heard. To Macaulay and Lucifer, this harvesting made it feel as though, to them, that the flow of blood, into the roofs of their mouths, made their entire face seem to tingle. At some moments they could see spots in their vision up until they had individually paused for a breath, then, once again, they would continue their genetically pushed desires. Ronnie. Malachi thought, through their ESP, I think that one of the kids just fell off of the top bunk. Malachi was most disturbed by the sound of a sudden sound of a thud within the house. But then, as he exited the bedroom, he had found his brother just walking out of his room. Due to the fact that he was asleep, he wasn't sure if the sound had come from the basement, upstairs, or outside. Are you sure that was in their room? Ronnie responded with a look of question in his face. Yeah. I'm sure. Malachi responded, and then together, with his brother they prepared to possibly having to call an ambulance or discipline the kids for making so much noise when people were asleep. In this episode, there was no pain. In fact, Tommy enjoyed the attention from both of his roommates as they played roughly with one another. Due to the fast movement within their play, Lucifer had gotten some splatter of blood, from Tommy, onto his face. Then, suddenly, without warning, the bedroom door flew open, as Malachi and Ronnie both walked in.